spark of discovery, unlocking the atom's power. Before the mushroom cloud, before the global fear, there was just an idea, a whisper in the halls of science, a theoretical possibility hidden within the very fabric of existence: the atom. For centuries, philosophers and scientists alike pondered the fundamental building blocks of matter. From the ancient Greek concept of atomos, the indivisible, to Dalton's atomic theory in the 19th century, our understanding slowly evolved. But it was the early 20th century, a period of unprecedented scientific revolution, that truly began to unveil the atom's inner secrets. The discovery of the electron by J.J. Thomson, Rutherford's planetary model, and Bohr's quantized orbits provided glimpses into a miniature universe humming with incredible energy. These were not just abstract concepts, they were profound insights into the nature of reality itself. The true game-changer arrived with the discovery of radioactivity. Marie Curie and her husband Pierre, working tirelessly in their Parisian laboratory, isolated polonium and radium, revealing elements that spontaneously emitted energy. This phenomenon hinted at a colossal force locked within the atomic nucleus, a force far greater than anything previously conceived. It demonstrated that atoms were not inert, immutable particles, but rather dynamic entities capable of transformation and immense energy release. Scientists began to realize that if this energy could be harnessed, it could either power the world or destroy it. The theoretical groundwork for unlocking this power was laid by brilliant minds across the globe, each adding a crucial piece to the puzzle. Ernest Rutherford, often called the father of nuclear physics, was the first to split the atom in 1917, though on a microscopic scale, demonstrating that transmutation was possible. This experimental proof fueled further research and speculation about the practical applications of such power. The intellectual landscape of physics at this time was a vibrant tapestry of collaboration and competition. Scientists exchanged ideas through letters, conferences, and publications, pushing the boundaries of human knowledge with an almost feverish intensity. The implications of these discoveries were not immediately clear to everyone, but a growing number of physicists began to grasp the monumental potential, both constructive and destructive, that lay dormant within the atom. The scientific community, however, operated largely in an environment of open inquiry, where the pursuit of knowledge was paramount. They were driven by curiosity, by the desire to understand the universe at its most fundamental level, unaware that their pursuit would soon lead to the creation of the most destructive weapon known to humankind. The theoretical foundation for atomic energy release truly crystallized with Albert Einstein's famous equation, E equals mc squared. Published in 1905 as part of his special theory of relativity, this elegant formula revealed the profound relationship between mass and energy. It stated that mass could be converted into energy, and vice versa, with an astonishing conversion factor, the speed of light squared. While not directly about nuclear fission, Einstein's equation provided the conceptual framework for understanding how a tiny amount of mass could yield an enormous amount of energy, precisely what happens in an atomic bomb. It was a theoretical pronouncement that would echo with devastating practical consequences decades later, an unwitting blueprint for a force that would forever alter the course of human history. The stage was set for a terrifying leap from theory to terrifying reality. The Architects of Annihilation. Who invented the atomic bomb? To speak of a single inventor of the atomic bomb is to oversimplify a monumental, collaborative, and often desperate scientific endeavor. The concept itself was a confluence of many minds and discoveries, but the actual development and construction of the weapon involved a vast network of scientists, engineers, and military personnel, primarily under the umbrella of the Manhattan Project. However, several figures stand out as pivotal in bringing the atomic bomb from theory to terrifying reality. One of the most crucial intellectual leaps was made by Leo Szilard. A Hungarian physicist, Szilard not only conceived of the nuclear chain reaction in 1933, but also understood its potential for a weapon. He was walking across a London street when the idea struck him. If a neutron could split an atom, releasing more neutrons, those new neutrons could split other atoms, leading to an exponential release of energy. Szilard immediately recognized the dual nature of this discovery, a limitless energy source or an unprecedented weapon of mass destruction. He even attempted to patent the idea of a nuclear chain reaction to prevent its misuse, demonstrating a foresight that was both brilliant and chilling. Szilard's persistent advocacy and deep understanding of the implications of nuclear physics made him a central, though often behind-the-scenes figure in the early stages. Another towering figure was Enrico Fermi. An Italian physicist, Fermi successfully demonstrated the first self-sustaining nuclear chain reaction at the University of Chicago on December 2nd, 1942. This landmark achievement, known as Chicago Pile 1, was a pivotal moment. It proved that a controlled release of nuclear energy was possible, providing the experimental validation necessary for the development of the bomb. Fermi's team, working in a squash court beneath the university's Stagg Field, meticulously stacked graphite blocks interspersed with uranium and cadmium rods to achieve criticality. The success of Chicago Pile 1 transformed the theoretical possibility of a nuclear weapon into a tangible scientific reality, demonstrating that sustained fission was achievable on a larger scale. While not directly involved in the bomb's construction, the prior discoveries of Otto Hahn and Fritz Strassmann in Germany were fundamental. In 1938, they observed that uranium atoms, when bombarded with neutrons, split into lighter elements, a process Lise Meitner and Otto Frisch correctly identified and termed nuclear fission. Meitner, a brilliant Austrian-Swedish physicist, and Frisch provided the theoretical explanation for Hahn's experimental results, calculating the immense energy released during this process. Their work, published in early 1939, immediately alerted the scientific community to the potential for a new, incredibly powerful energy source or weapon. Had these discoveries been kept secret, the timeline of nuclear weapons development might have been vastly different. Ultimately, the scientific director of the Los Alamos Laboratory, the primary research and development site of the Manhattan Project, was J. Robert Oppenheimer. A brilliant theoretical physicist, Oppenheimer assembled and led a team of the world's most talented scientists to design and build the atomic bomb. He was the intellectual force driving the project, orchestrating the complex interplay of physics, engineering, and metallurgy required to transform abstract concepts into a functional weapon. Oppenheimer's leadership, though fraught with moral complexities, was indispensable in the successful and rapid development of the atomic bomb, solidifying his place as the father of the atomic bomb, a title he would forever carry with profound ambivalence. The shadow of war. Why was it invented? The invention of the atomic bomb was not a detached scientific endeavor, but a direct, urgent response to the existential threat posed by World War II. The terrifying specter of Nazi Germany, with its aggressive expansion and brutal ideology, cast a long shadow over the world. By 1939, when nuclear fission was discovered, Europe was already on the brink of war, and the possibility of a German atomic weapon became a horrifying reality that drove much of the early atomic research. The fear was palpable. Many of the leading physicists who understood the implications of fission were European refugees, deeply aware of Hitler's scientific capabilities and ruthless ambition. The idea that Nazi Germany could develop such a devastating weapon first was a nightmare scenario. It was this fear that prompted Leo Szilard, along with fellow Hungarian physicists Eugene Wigner and Edward Teller, to draft a letter to President Franklin D. Roosevelt in August 1939. This letter, famously signed by Albert Einstein, chosen for his immense scientific prestige, warned the president about the potential for extremely powerful bombs of a new type, and urged the United States to accelerate its own research into uranium. The Einstein-Szilard letter was a critical catalyst, pushing the US government to take the threat seriously and initiate its own atomic research program. Initially, the American effort was small, but as the war escalated and intelligence suggested German interest in nuclear technology, the project gained momentum. By 1942, with the US fully immersed in the war, the Manhattan Project was officially launched, a top-secret colossal undertaking aimed at building an atomic bomb before the Nazis. The driving motivation was clear: defensive necessity. The prevailing belief was that if the Allies did not develop this weapon first, the Axis powers almost certainly would, potentially leading to catastrophic consequences for democracy and freedom. The war was already claiming millions of lives, and the prospect of a Nazi victory, possibly aided by an atomic weapon, was unthinkable. The urgency of the project was immense. Scientists worked under incredible pressure, with vast resources poured into research, development, and production facilities across the United States. Secrecy was paramount, with thousands of individuals involved, yet only a select few understanding the ultimate goal. The ethical dilemmas were immense, but they were often overshadowed by the perceived need to win the war and prevent a greater evil. The scientists and engineers involved believed they were in a race against time, a race for survival against a totalitarian regime that had already demonstrated its willingness to use any means necessary to achieve its objectives. Moreover, the sheer scale and brutality of the war itself played a role. Millions were dying on battlefields and in concentration camps. Conventional warfare was proving incredibly costly in terms of human lives and resources. Some believed that a weapon of such immense power could potentially bring the war to a swift end, thereby saving countless more lives that would be lost in a prolonged conflict. This reasoning, while controversial, became a powerful justification for the immense effort and resources invested in the atomic bomb's creation, framing it as a necessary evil in a world already consumed by unimaginable horrors. The Forge of Destiny, the Manhattan Project's scientific endeavor. The Manhattan Project was an unparalleled scientific and engineering marvel, a testament to human ingenuity under extreme pressure. It wasn't just about designing a bomb, it was about inventing an entire industry from scratch in less than 3 years. The central challenge lay in obtaining sufficient quantities of fissile material, specifically uranium-235 or plutonium-239, which are incredibly difficult to isolate or produce. Uranium, as found in nature, is primarily uranium-238, with only about 0.7% being the fissile isotope uranium-235. Separating these isotopes is an enormous technical hurdle because they are chemically identical, differing only slightly in mass. The project pursued multiple, incredibly complex methods for isotope separation. At Oak Ridge, Tennessee, vast facilities were built for gaseous diffusion, where uranium hexafluoride gas was pushed through miles of porous barriers, with the lighter U-235 diffusing slightly faster. Alongside this, electromagnetic separation, using massive calutrons, essentially giant mass spectrometers, separated ions of U-235 from U-238 in powerful magnetic fields. Both methods consumed enormous amounts of electricity, transforming the Tennessee landscape into a power-hungry industrial behemoth. Simultaneously, the project developed a way to produce plutonium-239. This required the construction of nuclear reactors to transmute uranium-238 into plutonium. Enrico Fermi's Chicago Pile 1 proved the concept, but scaling it up for industrial production was an entirely different challenge. At Hanford, Washington, massive graphite-moderated reactors were built along the Columbia River. These reactors irradiated natural uranium, converting U-238 into plutonium. Once produced, the plutonium had to be chemically separated from the highly radioactive spent fuel, a dangerous and technically demanding process carried out in heavily shielded facilities. The chemical reprocessing plants at Hanford were engineering marvels in themselves, designed to handle highly hazardous radioactive materials on an unprecedented scale. The design of the bomb itself presented immense scientific and engineering problems. Two primary designs were pursued: the gun-type assembly for uranium and the implosion type for plutonium. The little boy uranium bomb was relatively straightforward. A subcritical piece of U-235 was fired like a bullet into another subcritical piece, forming a supercritical mass and initiating a chain reaction. The Fat Man plutonium bomb was far more complex. Plutonium's tendency to pre-detonate due to spontaneous fission required a perfectly symmetrical, rapid compression of a subcritical plutonium sphere into a supercritical state. This was achieved using precisely timed explosive lenses, a revolutionary concept developed by Seth Neddermeyer and further refined by George Kistiakowsky. The precision required for these explosive lenses was extraordinary, demanding breakthroughs in high-speed detonation and experimental diagnostics. The Los Alamos laboratory, under J. Robert Oppenheimer, was the intellectual heart of the bomb's design. Here, physicists, chemists, metallurgists, and engineers worked around the clock, grappling with fundamental physics problems, materials, science challenges, and the sheer logistics of building such a complex device. They performed critical experiments to determine neutron cross-sections, critical masses, and the behavior of explosives under extreme conditions. The Trinity test, the world's first detonation of a nuclear weapon, on July 16, 1945, in the New Mexico desert, was the culmination of this extraordinary scientific and industrial effort, validating years of intense labor and ushering in the nuclear age with a blinding flash. The first fires, who used it? The atomic bomb was used by the United States of America under the executive order of President Harry S. Truman during the final stages of World War II. The decision to deploy this unprecedented weapon was one of the most fraught and controversial in human history, made amidst the brutal realities of a global conflict that had already claimed tens of millions of lives. On August 6, 1945, at approximately 8:15 a.m. local time, the little boy uranium bomb was dropped from the B-29 bomber Enola Gay on the city of Hiroshima, Japan. The explosion instantly incinerated the city center, creating a massive firestorm and unleashing a wave of destruction that leveled buildings for miles. An estimated 70,000 to 80,000 people were killed immediately or died within a few months from the blast, heat, and radiation. The city, a bustling urban center, was reduced to ashes and rubble in a single, horrifying moment. The initial reports to President Truman described the attack as an unqualified success. Just 3 days later, on August 9, 1945, a second atomic bomb, the Fat Man plutonium device, was dropped on Nagasaki, Japan, after the primary target, Kokura, was obscured by clouds. This attack resulted in an estimated 40,000 to 75,000 immediate deaths. The topography of Nagasaki, with its valleys, limited the blast effects somewhat compared to Hiroshima, but the destruction was still catastrophic. Both bombings caused immense suffering, not only from the initial blast and thermal radiation, but also from the lingering effects of radioactive fallout and the psychological trauma inflicted upon survivors, known as hibakusha. The primary stated justification for using the bombs was to bring about a swift end to World War II and avoid a prolonged, costly invasion of the Japanese mainland. U.S. military planners had estimated that an invasion, codenamed Operation Downfall, could result in hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of Allied casualties and even more Japanese deaths. The fierce resistance encountered on islands like Iwo Jima and Okinawa suggested that a mainland invasion would be unimaginably bloody. President Truman and his advisors believed that the shock and devastation of the atomic bombs would force Japan to surrender unconditionally, thereby saving countless lives on both sides that would otherwise be lost in a protracted conventional conflict. However, the decision remains a subject of intense historical debate. Critics argue that Japan was already on the verge of surrender, crippled by conventional bombing, naval blockades, and the recent entry of the Soviet Union into the war against them. They suggest that the bombs were either unnecessary or served other purposes, such as demonstrating American power to the Soviet Union at the dawn of the Cold War. Regardless of the ongoing debate about its necessity, the fact remains that the United States was the sole nation to ever use atomic weapons in warfare, forever linking its name to the dawn of the nuclear age and the unprecedented destructive power of the atomic bomb. The unseen killer, radiation and fallout. Beyond the immediate devastating effects of blast and heat, the atomic bomb introduced humanity to a new and insidious killer, radiation. The concept of radiation was not new to science, but its large-scale, weaponized release and its long-term consequences were terrifyingly novel. When a nuclear weapon detonates, it releases several forms of harmful radiation. The initial flash of the bomb produces intense gamma rays and neutrons. These are forms of ionizing radiation, meaning they carry enough energy to strip electrons from atoms, creating ions. Within living cells, this process can damage DNA, disrupt cellular functions, and ultimately lead to cell death. Proximity to the blast meant immediate and severe radiation sickness, characterized by nausea, vomiting, diarrhea, hair loss, internal bleeding, and a compromised immune system. For many, this sickness was a prolonged and agonizing path to death, even if they survived the initial explosion. The rapid cell division in the digestive system and bone marrow makes these areas particularly vulnerable to radiation, explaining many of the symptoms. However, the threat extends far beyond the initial burst. The fireball of a nuclear explosion vaporizes vast amounts of material from the ground, drawing it up into the mushroom cloud. This material becomes highly radioactive, infused with fission products, the remnants of split uranium or plutonium atoms, and transmuted elements. As this radioactive debris cools, it falls back to Earth as fallout. This fallout, composed of radioactive isotopes with varying half-lives, contaminates everything it touches: soil, water, plants, and ultimately, the food chain. People exposed to fallout, even far from the initial blast, can suffer from radiation sickness, and internal contamination occurs if radioactive particles are ingested or inhaled. The long-term health effects of radiation exposure are equally devastating. Survivors of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, known as hibakusha, have faced significantly higher rates of cancers, including leukemia, thyroid cancer, lung cancer, and breast cancer. Genetic mutations and birth defects were also observed in subsequent generations, though the direct hereditary effects in humans are complex and still studied. Radiation also leads to chronic health issues such as cataracts, cardiovascular diseases, and accelerated aging. The psychological trauma of living through such an event, combined with the constant fear of developing radiation-induced illnesses, added another layer of suffering. The invisible nature of radiation makes it particularly terrifying. It cannot be seen, smelled, or felt, yet it silently destroys from within. The scientific understanding of radiation effects has advanced significantly since 1945, but the fundamental principles remain. Ionizing radiation inflicts damage at the molecular and cellular level, leading to a cascade of harmful biological consequences. The legacy of Hiroshima and Nagasaki is not just in the flattened cities, but in the continued suffering of those affected by the unseen killer. a stark reminder of the indiscriminate and long-lasting horror unleashed by atomic weapons. Understanding this scientific reality is crucial to comprehending why such weapons must never be used again. The global chill, the Cold War, and nuclear proliferation. The dropping of the atomic bombs on Japan did not just end one war. It immediately ignited the fuse for another, the Cold War. The United States' monopoly on nuclear weapons was short-lived, shattering any illusion of lasting security through sole possession. In August 1949, the Soviet Union successfully detonated its own atomic bomb, Jo-1, shocking the world and triggering a furious arms race that would define international relations for the next 4 decades. The Cold War became a terrifying standoff between two superpowers, the United States and the Soviet Union, each armed with increasingly powerful nuclear arsenals. The doctrine of mutually assured destruction, or MAD, emerged as a chilling form of deterrence. The logic was grimly simple. If either side launched a first strike, the other would retaliate with devastating force, ensuring the complete annihilation of both. This suicidal pact, however, maintained a fragile peace, preventing direct military confrontation between the superpowers, but fueling proxy wars and an ever-present fear of global nuclear holocaust. The Cuban Missile Crisis in 1962 brought the world closer to nuclear war than ever before, highlighting the razor's edge upon which humanity teetered. The arms race accelerated with terrifying speed. Hydrogen bombs, thousands of times more powerful than the Hiroshima bomb, were developed. Intercontinental ballistic missiles, ICBMs, capable of delivering warheads anywhere on Earth within minutes, became operational. Submarines armed with nuclear missiles prowled the oceans, ensuring a second strike capability even after a devastating first attack. The sheer destructive power amassed by both sides defied imagination, capable of ending civilization multiple times over. This period saw a massive investment in scientific and technological resources, not for advancement and human betterment, but for the development of increasingly efficient means of destruction. Nuclear weapons also began to proliferate beyond the initial two powers. Great Britain, France, China, and then India, Pakistan, and North Korea all developed their own nuclear capabilities. Each new nation joining the nuclear club increased the risk of regional nuclear conflicts and raised the specter of these weapons falling into the wrong hands. The fear of horizontal proliferation, the spread of nuclear weapons to more states, led to international efforts like the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, NPT, aimed at preventing further spread while committing existing nuclear powers to disarmament. The Cold War fundamentally reshaped geopolitics. Nuclear weapons became the ultimate symbols of national power and prestige, but also a constant reminder of humanity's capacity for self-destruction. The scientific community, many of whom had contributed to the bomb's creation, became increasingly vocal in their warnings about the dangers of nuclear war. Organizations like the Bulletin of the Atomic Scientists, with its iconic doomsday clock, began to track the perceived proximity to global catastrophe. The nuclear shadow of the Cold War instilled a pervasive anxiety, forever altering the human perception of security and vulnerability. The science of devastation, nuclear winter and its aftermath. Beyond the immediate casualties of a nuclear exchange, scientists have long warned of a catastrophic, civilization-ending consequence known as nuclear winter. This theory, first extensively modeled in the 1980s by scientists like Carl Sagan and Richard P. Turco, the TTAPS group, describes the profound and long-lasting climatic effects of a large-scale nuclear war, even a regional one. The premise is rooted in the physics of combustion and atmospheric science. A major nuclear exchange would trigger massive firestorms in urban and forested areas. The intense heat would generate colossal amounts of smoke and soot, billions of tons, composed of fine particulate matter. Unlike typical atmospheric pollutants, These particles would be injected high into the stratosphere, above the level where rain could wash them out. Once in the stratosphere, these black, light-absorbing aerosols would persist for years, acting as a global sunscreen. The primary effect of this stratospheric soot layer would be a dramatic reduction in sunlight reaching the Earth's surface. Global average temperatures would plummet, potentially by tens of degrees Celsius, leading to widespread and prolonged freezing conditions, even in summer. This winter would be far more severe and persistent than any natural climate event. Photosynthesis, the basis of almost all life on Earth, would be severely hampered or cease entirely due to the lack of sunlight and extreme cold. The ecological consequences would be catastrophic. Crops would fail globally, leading to mass famine on an unprecedented scale. Terrestrial and marine ecosystems would collapse as food chains are disrupted. Plant life, deprived of light, would die, and animals reliant on them would starve. Even species resilient to cold might succumb to starvation and habitat destruction. The entire biosphere would be thrown into chaos. Furthermore, the nuclear firestorms would inject massive amounts of nitrogen oxides into the atmosphere. These chemicals would react with and deplete the ozone layer, our natural shield against harmful ultraviolet, UV, radiation from the sun. Once the dust and soot eventually cleared, the Earth would be exposed to drastically increased levels of UV radiation, further damaging surviving plant and animal life, including humans. This would lead to widespread skin cancers, cataracts, and immune system damage, making any recovery incredibly difficult. The scientific consensus on nuclear winter has been strengthened by more recent climate modeling, which indicates that even a relatively limited regional nuclear exchange, for example, between India and Pakistan, could trigger significant global cooling, agricultural collapse, and widespread famine. The sheer scale of destruction, starvation, and environmental degradation predicted by nuclear winter scenarios underscores the absolute existential threat posed by these weapons. It's not just about cities being destroyed. It's about the fundamental life support systems of the planet being irrevocably damaged, making human survival profoundly uncertain. The science is clear. Nuclear war would not be a conventional conflict. It would be a planetary catastrophe. A legacy of fear, the moral and ethical imperative. The scientific facts about nuclear weapons are stark, but their true weight lies in the moral and ethical dilemmas they impose on humanity. The atomic bomb, born of scientific curiosity and wartime necessity, has left a legacy of fear and a profound moral scar. It forced humanity to confront its capacity for self-annihilation and raised fundamental questions about the limits of scientific pursuit and the responsibilities that come with immense power. The very act of targeting civilian populations with such indiscriminate destruction fundamentally challenged established norms of warfare. While conventional bombing campaigns during World War II also resulted in massive civilian casualties, the atomic bombs represented a qualitative leap in destructive power and efficiency of mass killing. The intentional incineration of entire cities, with their non-combatant populations, sparked immediate ethical outrage and continues to fuel debate about the morality of such acts. Was it ever justifiable to unleash such horror, even to end a terrible war? The answer remains deeply contested. The existence of nuclear weapons introduces a perpetual state of existential risk. Humanity now possesses the means to end its own civilization, a power once reserved for cataclysmic natural events. This places an unprecedented moral burden on political leaders, military strategists, and every citizen. The nuclear button represents a power that should ideally never be exercised, yet its mere existence shapes global politics and casts a long shadow over future generations. The responsibility to prevent its use is a collective moral imperative. Furthermore, the environmental and health consequences extend far beyond the immediate target zones, affecting generations with radiation sickness, cancers, and genetic damage. The concept of collateral damage takes on an entirely new, horrifying dimension with nuclear weapons, affecting non-combatants and innocent bystanders on a global scale through fallout and nuclear winter. The weapon's indiscriminate nature means that they cannot be used surgically or with precision. Their use inevitably leads to widespread, uncontrollable suffering. The moral argument against nuclear weapons is not solely about their use, but their very existence. As long as they exist, there is a risk of accident, miscalculation, or deliberate use. This risk creates a climate of distrust, fuels arms races, and diverts vast resources that could otherwise be used for human development, poverty alleviation, and addressing other global challenges. The ethical imperative is to move towards a world free of nuclear weapons, not just to prevent their use, but to remove the constant threat they pose to our shared future. It is a call to recognize that some weapons are simply too terrible to exist, and that humanity's continued survival depends on its ability to transcend the destructive impulses that created them. The unlearned lesson, why we should never use it again. The reasons why humanity should never use atomic bombs again are not merely historical or theoretical. They are an urgent, scientific, ethical, and practical imperative for the continued survival of our species. The lessons of the past, amplified by modern scientific understanding, paint an undeniable picture of catastrophic consequences that far outweigh any conceivable strategic gain. Firstly, the sheer, unprecedented scale of destruction. Atomic bombs are not just bigger bombs, they are fundamentally different. They instantly vaporize cities, annihilate populations, and render vast areas uninhabitable. There is no limited nuclear war. Any use of these weapons opens the door to an escalation that could quickly lead to global devastation. The blast, heat, and radiation combine to create a perfect storm of suffering and death that simply cannot be controlled or contained. Secondly, the long-term, irreversible environmental catastrophe of nuclear winter. As we've discussed, even a relatively small nuclear exchange could plunge the planet into a prolonged period of darkness and extreme cold, leading to crop failures, mass starvation, and the collapse of ecosystems worldwide. This is not just a threat to combatants, it's a threat to every living being on Earth, including those far removed from any conflict zone. The planet's intricate climate system, finely balanced, simply cannot absorb such an immense shock without severe, protracted, and potentially irreversible damage. Thirdly, the insidious and generational suffering from radiation. Unlike conventional weapons, atomic bombs leave behind an invisible, silent killer that continues to claim lives and inflict suffering for decades, even centuries. Cancers, birth defects, and chronic illnesses become a horrifying legacy for survivors and their descendants. There is no recovery from radiation poisoning, only prolonged agony or slow death. This makes atomic weapons fundamentally inhumane, violating any ethical standard of warfare. Fourthly, the erosion of moral and ethical boundaries. The first use of atomic bombs shattered a fundamental taboo. To use them again, even in a seemingly desperate situation, would further normalize their use, making future deployments more likely. It would be an abdication of humanity's collective moral responsibility to protect life and prevent unimaginable suffering. Once Pandora's box is opened again, there is no guarantee it can ever be closed. Finally, the absolute certainty of global instability and eventual annihilation. As long as nuclear weapons exist and are seen as viable instruments of policy, the risk of proliferation, accidental use, or deliberate deployment remains. Each additional nuclear state, each new technological advancement, each political crisis increases the odds of the unthinkable. The only path to genuine security in the nuclear age is through their elimination. The science is definitive, the ethics are clear. The atomic bomb represents a threat so profound that its further use is an act of species-level suicide. We must remember Hiroshima and Nagasaki not as distant historical events, but as a perpetual warning, a stark reminder that humanity's greatest inventions can become its greatest threats if not governed by wisdom, empathy, and an unwavering commitment to peace. We must never use them again.